I think, well, the first thing is just a really great time to be an entrepreneur in the space. So stick with it is what it's like. Don't leave, right? Because actually that's pretty simple advice, but that is what we saw in 2017. There was like a lot of momentum, a lot of excitement, but then some companies just kind of like, argued that the market was too small and then kind of left and did something else. And I think honestly, they probably regret not having stayed in the NFT space.
Matt, what's happening, man?
Sam, I'm doing great. How are you feeling?
Fantastic. Who we got lined up today?
We've got a very special guest, Devin Finzer, CEO and co-founder of OpenSea, the largest NFT marketplace, experiencing tremendous growth right now. Really excited to have him on the podcast. What are you excited to hear about?
Yeah, I mean, I think Devin and OpenSea are doing tremendous amounts of incredible work and empowering this whole NFT movement at large, right? I mean, I know recently too they closed a Series B funding of $150 million at a $1.5 billion valuation. I'd say one of the first true unicorns in the space, and I think it's really special hearing his perspective, not only on what's enabled the growth and what's on the roadmap of OpenSea, but also what's the mission. What are some of the other opportunities that he sees in the space, right? I think we speak a lot about how the market is developing as a lot of new talent is attracted and is able to really apply that talent towards driving adoption and creating interesting applications within the space. We're still very much in the first inning, so hearing his perspective on adoption, on some of the interesting problems to tackle, on the specific problems that they're working to tackle, was really fascinating. So I really enjoyed this. What about you? What stood out?
Yeah, I love the fact that, he describes going from a team of six when this wave comes crashing on the shore, and scaling and playing and to meet the demand and the amount of traffic and sales volume that's coming through. And it seems like they're really kind of looking towards the long term and are firmly focused on improving user experience. Loved hearing thoughts on some of those insights as to areas where there's going to be what's right for opportunity for increased growth, and just some of the lessons and moments that stood out along the way, because it's been such a tremendously dynamic journey over the past 6 months. So much has happened, and I feel like OpenSea has been really at the center of that. Before we dive in, just want to remind everyone, tune into our weekly newsletter, nftnow.co. We simplify everything that's going on in these crazy markets into actionable insights right to your inbox. Without any further ado, Devin Finzer. Devin, what's good, man? Happy to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's an exciting time to be chatting. I saw that tweet of yours about OpenSea doing 21 million in sales volume in all of 2020, and then doing 95 million in a 2-day period, heading for record sales volume in August. I saw that it's already pretty much matched all of July's in just 1 week. What is it like running OpenSea right now, with this sort of explosive growth?
It's really fun. Yeah, it's a combination of exciting, stressful, and fun, right? So I think we were completely flabbergasted by the last couple weeks, and like the month of August so far is just insane. But it really feels like a brand new internet. It feels like a lot of the trends that people have been talking about for a long time are kind of coming together, and really just everyone's talking about NFTs, which is just exciting place to be in. On OpenSea's front, we're kind of all hands on deck trying to stabilize our platform, deal with record traffic, and hire the right people to continue building out what we're the marketplace functionality. So it's been a lot of fun.
Oh, for sure, man. I'm sure it's a roller coaster ride at times too. Lots of ups and downs. In that vein, though, I mean, when you think about the mission, like what is the mission of OpenSea? Obviously, we're all connected and excited about the potential that NFTs have with regards to empowering creators, creating a successful and viable economic model and middle class for lots of industries where it hasn't necessarily been that way. What, from your perspective, is the mission of OpenSea?
Yeah, well, our simplest and most immediate mission is to build the best and largest, deepest, broadest marketplace for NFTs. But more broadly and looking further into the future, we're really excited about the conversion of all sorts of wealth to real digital wealth, right? Mm-hmm. And so empowering creators is a piece of that, empowering game developers, empowering collectors, really just sort of building a foundational layer for a completely new paradigm in online life, right? So we're much like early platforms, like the early internet, like early mobile. We think it's really hard to predict exactly what's going to come from all of this, but we know that a marketplace is a really important building block. So that's why we kind of are positioning our product as sort of a foundational layer on which lots of different things can be built.
Makes
That's
sense.
awesome.
Makes sense. And, it's really interesting. I'm a big data guy, so I love watching the trends. I'm checking the rankings and the charts. And, it's really interesting to see how CryptoArt really drove explosive growth at the beginning of the year. And now digital collectibles are driving a lot of growth. And, given that you have a bit of finger on the pulse, I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on like what other categories do you think are kind of like ripe for breakouts?
Yeah, I think gaming has always been sort of, I mean, you see Axie Infinity doing big numbers, but it's always felt like it had huge potential, but it's still super early, right? If you look at kind of the volume of these collectible projects relative to the volume of like Zed Run or some of these horse racing games or some of the virtual world games, those are still pretty small, relatively speaking, because gaming is a giant market. Fortnite makes billions of dollars in revenue, so there's just huge potential there. So I think like, it's our perspective is just gonna be a lot of different stuff, and we're sort of starting to see the early experiments, but they still feel like toys. I would point to gaming as like one that has a lot of potential.
Yeah, no, super exciting. And in that vein too, I mean, I know kind of the big breakout to date really has been like crypto art, digital art. Was that surprising to you? I mean, I know you've been working on this for a while, and obviously there was a lot of explosive growth this year, but was that what you expected to be the breakout category?
No. Yeah, it was not what I expected. We expected virtual worlds and gaming use cases to come before crypto art. We were, skeptical that people would buy just pure collectible NFTs, right? And honestly, we didn't really understand the art world, but we've been like pleasantly surprised that that's been a huge thing. And it just, now that it's happened, it makes a lot of sense, right? It's like a digital artist never really had a way to just to monetize their work in a real way. And it's such a basic, primitive use case that you can really rally momentum around it. Whereas with something like gaming, you have to go and build an entire game, and that's just going to take a lot longer, right?
Right. In that vein, to extrapolate on that, like when you think about some of the broader use cases and applications beyond just the simple, I guess, digital collectibles or this kind of very early movement with digital art and crypto art, like can you dive deeper into some of the other core functionality and usage of NFTs?
I think event ticketing is still really cool. We've seen some experiments with that, but still really early. Like I don't think we've seen like a mass event that has used NFTs as tickets. I think some of the like access NFTs are really cool. That's something that's really has started to be experimented with. I think another one for folks who are looking for like a cool project idea is tokenizing physical assets, allowing them to be traded as NFTs and then redeemed for the physical item. So the physical asset could be like, some super fancy piece of clothing that resides with, some company, but you can trade around the NFT indefinitely and then redeem it, right? Yeah. And so it sort of anchors the value to something physical. So I always thought that idea was cool. I think there are now like a couple experiments doing that, but I haven't seen a company that's doing it in like a really big way yet.
Makes total sense. And, kind of as we look ahead towards, the next 5 years, the next 10 years, in terms of growth, I'm curious how you think about the NFT market. Like, do you see it sort of tracking with the crypto bull and bear markets? Is the data showing an interesting, like a different correlation?
Yeah.
Just curious to how you're seeing it and kind of planning based on that.
Yeah. Well, I think generally speaking, it's going to be like a huge market, just completely massive. We're talking about like all sorts of assets being tokenized as NFTs. And, it's starting with these collectibles, and then it's eventually going to move to things like real estate, right? So it's, it's giant. In terms of how it tracks against crypto, I think the way that we see it is crypto prices bring in excitement and talent into the space. Like for example, for me in 2017, one of the reasons that crypto was on my radar was because the prices were blowing up. People were doing ICOs. It was like, what's going on here? And then you get talent coming in and building actual applications. And I think NFTs are more like legitimate applications that I think will be relatively uncorrelated to the crypto prices. There's obviously like a long term. There's obviously, to some extent, the price of ETH goes up and people trade in ETH. So there's like complicated. But I really do see the crypto prices as more of like a talent piece, like bringing in people, and then the NFT market really being more about just what people have built, right?
Yeah, and just to kind of follow up on that, what do you think are some of like the main factors that NFTs face, to sort of foster mainstream adoption?
I think onboarding right now is still really difficult. So that's something that we're starting to work on more, is how do we get the first user to sign up and like understand NFTs. I was just, user testing the other day, and like it was really hard for someone to even understand that like MetaMask was a Chrome extension and like install it and then coming back and refresh. So just those sort of simple things. The fiat to crypto piece is big, right? You have to sort of be part of the crypto ecosystem for a little bit to be able to transact in crypto. And then I think also just, building out more use cases, right? So I think not everyone is going to like want to buy a profile pic project. The prices are really high. So scalability at the sort of underlying chain layer. So it's like just a ton of challenges, but they're all pretty solvable in my opinion. Like none of them, there's no insurmountable challenge. It's just like a bunch of different things that need to happen. Right?
Yeah, for sure. 1000%. In that vein, when it comes to like entertainment, I know like congrats on the recent fundraising round very
Thanks.
much. And then I think like it seemed like there were some interesting entertainment heavyweights on there. Michael Ovett, CAA. When you think about the entertainment industry, how do you really see them adopting NFTs? Whether it's film and IP and content ownership, or sports and access. I know it's kind of broad range: music, film, sports. But when you think about entertainment adopting NFTs, what excites you the most there?
Yeah, I think anything where there's like real utility to the NFT is super exciting. I think when things started taking off in February, March, we had these sort of like very random NFTs, like Taco Bell kind of like launching their own NFT, right? Which was like a little bit, it just felt very primitive. But I think now people are getting a lot more sophisticated, and they're iterating and like figuring out, looking at the Gronk drop and saying like, okay, what piece of that worked really well, and what can we like iterate on, and how can we add more interesting elements to the NFTs. So I think, it's just sort of, I don't know exactly what's going to resonate the most, but I think it's just sort of like people really, holding themselves to a high standard for like quality, right? And the other exciting thing is just more companies popping up that help people do this, right? We handhold a bit, but our resources are limited, so we tend to kind of work with different partners that will like, do more of the custom integration with various companies.
Right.
For sure. And, in that fundraising announcement, you also announced CrossChain Support.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious to hear, how do you envision sort of the future of NFTs being cross-chain? Is it layer 2 solutions like Polygon? Is it the next phase for Ethereum? Some of the competitor chains? Curious to hear your thoughts on the landscape.
Yeah, my rough sense is it's going to be like a multi-chain world with lots of different options, right? We now have working layer 2s like Polygon, which are reducing the transaction cost for users. When we launched on Polygon, we sort of re-architected things so users don't have to worry as much about gas costs, which is nice. But then also, you have your layer 1s, Flow, Solana, and we're seeing like interesting traction there. We're taking originally we thought, we're just going to add every chain on the planet, but we realized there are network effects around chains. So like once you bridge your ETH into Polygon, you play a couple Polygon games, you're sort of in that ecosystem, and you don't necessarily want to like go all the way to Binance Smart Chain, right? Or something like that. That being said, like we definitely like are excited about the early ecosystems on new layer 1s like Flow, Tezos, Solana. So we've built our infrastructure in a way that we can support many different chains in the future. We just have to be cognizant of, I think there is a really strong network effect around the tooling on Ethereum, right? The fact that MetaMask has, I think I was looking at the Chrome extension or the Chrome store, and it was like 6 million installs, right? And so MetaMask is going to work with every single EVM compatible chain, which is really like a pretty strong network effect around the wallet layer versus like on something like Solana, you're kind of starting fresh. Although I think Solana is thinking about EVM compatibility as well. But it definitely seems like there's sort of a network effect building around these EVM-based chains right now.
Yeah, no, for sure. Fascinating. So one thing that's interesting too, I know Matt and I both spent a lot of time working in music industry, and I see a very interesting analogy to like Spotify and these different streaming platforms and OpenSea, and the extent that as adoption really grows and there's a lot of users, they now truly have the power to become the tastemakers and help break new talent. So there's this opportunity and responsibility of kind of helping users with curation and discovery. Think about Rap Caviar or these very notable playlists on Spotify. How are you approaching curation and discovery to help users find NFTs they love?
Yeah, I think we have a lot of room to improve there, to be honest. Like our homepage is pretty basic. We have like featured slots. We try to, one thing that's really important for us is not just supporting the bigger players, right? The bigger brands that are getting into the space, but also supporting like the smaller artists. So on our homepage, we do like a featured slot that is typically like, an artist that's a lot smaller and sort of give them a little more real estate to work with. The other things we're working on are sort of more algorithmic curation. So ensuring that like we can identify trending collections without us having to go and like manually curate them, those sorts of things. But yeah, I think generally it's a really exciting opportunity, and it's not just our opportunity because the data is completely open. So really anyone can go and build a discovery experience around NFTs. But I do think that there's something powerful about like the leading marketplace sort of having a lot of those tools as well.
For sure. And I mean, in that, you kind of mentioned that there's like opportunities for other people to help build some sort of discovery. I mean, seeing it happen in a low fidelity way on Twitter and different influencers and tastemakers, but I'm sure it'll evolve a lot more over time. As an entrepreneur, I'm curious what advice you have for other people. You mentioned that more talent are coming into the industry, building interesting applications. For somebody that's starting to scratch the surface of NFTs and really interested in wanting to engage in the industry, what kind of advice do you have as an entrepreneur on how to really engage and find and support interesting opportunities and applications in the space?
Yeah. I think, the first thing is just a really great time to be an entrepreneur in the space. So stick with it is what it's like. Don't leave, right? Because actually that's pretty simple advice, but that is what we saw in 2017. There was like a lot of momentum, a lot of excitement, but then some companies just kind of like, argued that the market was too small and then kind of left and did something else. And I think honestly, they probably regret not having stayed in the NFT space. I don't think that's as much of a problem now. There's like so much momentum around it that I think people are like coming and staying. But that's number one. Number two is really like figure out how to play into the ecosystem versus building like everything yourself, right? Like what tools can you leverage that already exist to like test things out, right? So like, for example, I think OpenSea is a great tool for just like getting your work out there, putting it on sale as opposed to like building your own kind of platform or marketplace from the get-go, right? So that's another thing I would add. And then, just thinking like learning as much as possible, engaging with the community, joining the Discords, joining the Telegrams, like talking to people and learning about like what are the problems and like what are the solutions that you're excited about solving. And I think there's just like so much white space to do things, right? There's so many different applications of NFTs that haven't been tried. There's a lot of infrastructure that hasn't been built. So just going out there and kind of learning as much as possible and being focused on like providing customer value as opposed to, I think another trap that some people in crypto kind of fall into is just being like a little overly philosophical or like dogmatic about like ultra decentralization or something like that, right? Versus just taking a more practical approach and like asking people kind of like, what do they want and then building it.
Right.
Makes total sense. It's interesting because, OpenSea has emerged, far and away as, the largest secondary marketplace for NFTs in a class of its own. And I know you've also done, a number of primary drops and primary sales. I'm curious what your thought is about the balance on that going forward and if you're trying to like do more of that or.
Yeah. So primary sales is like new for us, right? Because traditionally, like where our marketplace shines is like someone else builds a project, they release their items somehow, and then people need a place for them to trade them. And so like the majority of our volume is secondary at the moment. But one of our goals is really like partner more with new projects that want to come into the space and learn about it, and increase the amount of primary partnership volume on the site. So we just brought on Ryan Foudy, who's leading our business development efforts, and that's one of his goals for the rest of the year is really like work with partners to increase primary sale volume. So it's definitely something we're focused on. We're definitely, our brand is more around the open secondary marketplace, but we're really excited about working with more people there.
That's super cool. And then, I mean, I guess also when looking forward around kind of product evolution, I mean, one interesting thing that excites us with regards to why people are often motivated to buy NFTs, and I think this goes far beyond NFTs, but it's just this notion of like status and identity, right? Like buying and holding things that you like and really attaching your identity to it. The same way when you like a musician, you ascribe a lot of your identity and wear their merch, etc. So I think by nature, this will become a more and more social experience. When you think about kind of the convergence of social media and NFTs, and not necessarily I just want to share my NFTs on Instagram, but creating a more social experience, like how are you thinking around the kind of social interaction and convergence of social media and NFTs?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff that could happen. Like if you think about what's happening right now, oftentimes people are kind of like, I'm getting a lot of NFTs in my wallet from like random projects that are kind of like using it as a messaging platform almost, right? They're like sending stuff to you and like, you're like, okay, interesting. So I think there's going to be something around the, NFTs in your wallet sort of being like an inbox in some ways, but also being a way that you display your identity. Like you'll be able to kind of show off in different environments and probably like curate which NFTs you want to show off in like which virtual world and things like that. But I think there's a lot of like weird, interesting unsolved problems because it's this giant like public ledger. And so it means that like, technically, and the way that NFTs are architected, you don't have to like accept an NFT, right? You can just like I could just send one to you and like, it might be something really obnoxious, right? So I don't. Yeah, it's like I think there's a whole like set of problems to solve there. Like we've been kind of just going after the low hanging fruit. So like we now allow people to hide stuff on their profile that they don't want to show off, right? So more tools like that I think will be really valuable. And then it is becoming sort of like a identity that can move across different applications, right? So on Facebook or Instagram, you do have this identity, but it only lives within Instagram or Facebook, right? And now with NFTs, you have this identity layer, but it like goes with you across any different application and you own it, right? So that's just a really powerful idea. And I think, maybe it's not even just sort of NFTs, it's other things that you sort of curate about your wallet address and like mark that all the DeFi applications that you've used, right? So I don't know if you guys have seen Rabbit Hole, but it's like, it does some of that kind of like data collection around like, what has this address done, right? Like used Uniswap, used OpenSea, all of these things. So I think those sorts of platforms are really interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, just kind of looking back, it's been a wild past 6 months, a bit of a whirlwind. So much has been happening. The space moves so quickly. I'm curious if there are any sort of moments that stand out, any specific ones, or even like specific challenges you had to overcome or lessons learned.
Yeah. Oh man, a lot. I think one of the moments that stands out is early February was when, there was one day where like normally on a given day, we would do maybe like $50,000 of volume or something before all of these things started blowing up. And then it was like a single day, it was like 5 million in volume, like just jumping, right? Because this hash masks project went wild. And then and it was funny because we're like, every time that happened, we were kind of like, okay, it's probably going to come back down to the level it was before, maybe a little bit above. But it's just kind of kept on like growing, right? And I think maybe that's an interesting lesson is like, you really have to plan for the future, right? Because there is in crypto, there's like a meme that markets are very cyclical and we're always preparing for a winter. And that may be true too, but like you also have to prepare for the summer, right? Where like things just keep on blowing up. And so, on our side, I think we've done a decent job of like, at that time when that started happening, I think our team was like 6 or 7 people, right? And so the sort of volume growth, and if you look at, I actually just mapped out sort of like the GMV or volume per employee, that has grown so much that we're like now in catch-up mode on like company building. So I think that's just been like an interesting experience of trying to grow the company, after all of this kind of like crazy growth has happened. So sort of like playing a lot of catch up. Other interesting learnings, I think like fraud is becoming a really important thing for us. So like improving trust and reducing the likelihood that someone's able to like create a fake NFT and sell it to someone else. So I think we've been learning that like investing in those simple things and investing in our core is way more important than like going out and doing like a bunch of crazy, social experiments while we're like still a young company. So I think that's been interesting. It's just investing in kind of like what we do well and gradually, incrementally improving the user experience.
Yeah, for sure. Put you on the hot seat with this question, kind of. But if you were not running OpenSea, or if you were to start a new business in the space, what problem would you want to tackle? Or what
in the
problems?
NFT space?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. The one that comes to mind is around the physical stuff. I think that's a pretty cool idea. Is basically like, so here's a startup idea for anyone who wants it. Like basically just being a custodian of physical stuff and tokenizing it, right? Like you send me some really nice piece of clothing, I ensure that it's valid. Like it's sort of StockX without the trading functionality, right? All you're doing is just tokenizing it. I don't know if that's like a big business, but I just think it's like a really cool thing, right? If I could just send something somewhere and suddenly it's tokenized and suddenly it can be traded on open marketplaces, I think that would be pretty awesome. Other ones like maybe like a game or we had this project early on called Ethmoji, which was sort of like an avatar project. Now there are a couple projects that are kind of like that, but I think it would be fun to do something like that. Yeah.
Dope. Love it. And in that vein too, I mean, I know you mentioned early on that you figured one of the early breakout cases for NFTs and just kind of marketplace transaction volume on OpenSea would kind of be in this like virtual world landscape. I mean, can you dive a bit deeper as far as kind of how you see virtual worlds, the metaverse, if you will, like evolving and how you feel people at scale were really engaged in these environments?
Yeah. So it's hard to say exactly like at scale how it will happen, but I'm personally really excited about Decentraland, CryptoVoxels, Sandbox as just sort of, social environments. They're not exactly games, but they're just places where people can hold events and show off NFTs, right? So Decentraland has been doing like tons of really cool events. I think it's, it just takes time for people to kind of learn about it, become comfortable with it, make friends in the game. But I could see those sort of grassroots economies really like flourishing over the next year, right? It's hard to predict what the next wave of excitement will be in the space, but I think like virtual land is really ripe for that because they've been building those projects for quite some time now, and a lot of people in the NFT space still don't know like about CryptoVoxels or Decentraland, and they're really like this integral piece of the experience, right? Because if you want to buy digital art, sure you can display it in like a physical environment, but I think it's actually much more powerful for it to be part of a digital environment, like digital native first, right? So I see these early gallery experiences in virtual worlds as like really providing really important utility for NFTs. But yeah, it's hard to say exactly. Like, I think it'll probably be like many different metaverses, like, kind of like scattered around as opposed to sort of like the unified Ready Player One vision or whatever. But yeah.
There's so many. I totally agree with that. By the way, I think that why show this art to a few people in your house when you can show it to billions on the internet, right? But I think that there's so many projects popping up all the time. I'm sure it's hard to even keep track of them all. But are there any that you've seen that sort of like stand out to you as being particularly innovative or exciting?
Let's see. Like newer projects or
either or.
I mean, I'm a big fan of Zed Run, like building an actual legitimate game on blockchain. I think is a really cool idea. I like the art. I've always been a fan of Decentraland, as I was just speaking of. CryptoVoxels is a really cool one because they started in like early 2018, I believe, and back then the land was like 0.1 ETH or something like that, and now now it's like 2 or 3 ETH, which is still I think really cheap. But I like these projects that start early and just kind of keep building through the different cycles, and then you sort of fast forward from like when they started to today, and it's like completely different, like completely mind blowing new experience compared to like the early version of it. But I'm also like outdated, so there's probably like other cool projects that I don't know about.
I don't think anyone fully knows all the projects at this point. There's just so many popping up.
There's so many, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think just to kind of wrap things up, just really curious to hear, what excites you looking forward in terms of OpenSea's roadmap and evolution.
Yeah. I am really excited about just continued growth of the space. So hitting more users, right? I think right now we're at like 0.002% penetration of the planet in terms of people who have like used OpenSea, for example. So I think just, bringing more people on board and like, spreading this technology to people who, have different perspectives and like different ways of interacting with it. Mm-hmm. So just general growth of the space, I think is just really exciting. And then, I think also just the sort of unsexy improvements that we're making to the website. So better ways to like explore items and like drill down, better multi-chain support. So, investing in our Polygon integration and then expanding to new chains, better fiat on-ramp, so easier to buy for regular people, better notification systems so people are frustrated with like the spamminess of bids and things like that. So investing in that core marketplace layer so that like all the other people in the space can do really cool stuff and sort of like take that layer for granted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Devin, man, keep up the great work.
Thanks.
We're super grateful for all the contributions and how you're really uplifting the community through what you're doing. So appreciate you coming on today and sharing some of your insight.
Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure.
Man, that was an incredible episode. Really, really enjoyed hearing what Devin had to say. I think really exciting developments on the roadmap. Excited to see a lot of these other kind of like breakout verticals and industries really evolve in the coming months and years. I think really just incredible to have them pull back the curtains a little bit on what they're working on, what their perspective is. Clearly, OpenSea has become one of the largest players in the space and doing tons to really uplift the industry and the growing industry as a whole. But as you mentioned, it's at 0.002% of the kind of target user base, and what he really sees is the total addressable market here.
I got a little bit of chills when he said that percentage because that just shows how early we are and how much further there is to go. I thought it was really interesting just hearing the narrative from how much has changed and how much OpenSea has grown from the early months of this year and late last year to the kind of explosive growth that they're experiencing right now. We're in for a record month here in August, and hearing about all of the experiences along the way was really interesting. And I loved hearing a bit about how he's looking towards the future. His thoughts on cross-chain support and a cross-chain world for NFTs. Mm-hmm. His thoughts on improving the user experience on OpenSea, and looking ahead towards gaming and the Metaverse as huge growth areas, which I think is spot on.
1,000%. Well, really enjoyed that conversation. Hope you all did too. We'll be right back next week. Another episode coming hot off the airwaves. And I think now it's time for me to stop talking. So take care, guys.